that in the agreement to sell forward in the 80s, the then leader of the opposition railed against it, dead set against it. How could you do that, etc., etc. And he makes a point, almost as a joke. He says when the government changed in 1989, it wasn't long after that he received a phone call that asked if he would be interested in renewing the forward sale. And he used a particular quote that I won't repeat here, but I would encourage you for you to see it for yourself. The point being, that call would have come right, in 1990, 1991, whatever the year was. I don't know the exact year, because the government would have found itself in need of financing, and this was an asset they could sell forward and get money, right? So that those two structural those two structural weaknesses have posed a problem: the weakness of CAP and the fiscal weakness position of Jamaica. Now, the good news is that we have been addressing both. We have been addressing the structural weakness in CAP by completely reforming its energy base, moving to an LNG base, and indeed CAP is also moving into solar and other means of energy. And we're reforming the offtake agreement here by getting a much better price relative to market. There are no guarantees in life. If the market collapses, then you're still in trouble, right? But when the market was here, this is the price that we were getting, okay? Because even though we agreed 15% of LME in 2013, the percentage of LME in the marketplace went all the way up to 16, 17, 18. Yeah? And then on the fiscal side, the government of Jamaica is in a stronger position that we can, by being able to pay off this loan before it becomes due, 5 years before it comes due, we are able to negotiate a better offtake. So the future for, and I'm talking about, I'm speaking from a purely financial and fiscal point of view. The mining point of view, the mining minister of mining will speak about. But from a purely financial point of view, the future of CAP is very, very positive, depending on the decisions that we make. There is going to be increasing demand for carbon neutral product, and car makers and others are going to want to know what's the carbon footprint per pound of aluminum that they purchase. CAP and Jamaica is going to be in a very strong position to be able to talk about producing clean molecules, right? And as we make these structural changes, depending on how the market operates, the future for CAP is likely to be much better than its immediate past. Now, incorporation, member, is a value and a benefit in itself because it opens up a wider potential avenues of financing beyond simply shareholder financing. As it is now, yes, CAP has been able to borrow in the capital market by itself, right? But as a limited liability company, the range of lenders it could go to would be far greater than it can go to in this kind of esoteric structure that needs niche financing. The more important thing, however, is that because in this particular form, whatever debt that operation takes on becomes a part of our national debt. If it were an incorporated company in which we own 45% and it went to borrow to fund working capital, that would not count as part of our national debt. In the same way that the debt incurred by Trans-Jamaica Highway, which was majority owned by the French at the time they owned it, that debt was not a part of our national debt stock. So it allowed... No, we were. We had preference shares that entitled us to profit. Right. But our shareholding entitled us to 50% of the profits. Okay, so we had a 50% beneficial interest. So if we own 45% of a limited liability company, much the same way we own 20% of JPS. Okay.
Just on a point of clarity or information, I don't think the analogy is relevant, really. Government of Jamaica had no common equity in Trans-Jamaican Highway. It had provided some funding for which it had a special instrument which entitled it to a share of, under a waterfall of cash flows, after debt had been serviced, operating costs, a chunk, 50% of the free cash flows after that. So very different. So the question of TGH's debt being part of the public debt really would never arise from an accounting perspective. If CAP has, if the new entity, the new incorporation, if the new entity, whatever it's going to be called, has debt, and Jamaica through CAP has a piece of, has 45% of the equity in that.
It would not be the debt stock.
That's purely that's just an accounting reality because it's not going to consolidate it in its books.
Right. So remember, that's the point I'm making, that if it's incorporated, right now what happens is that CAP is a joint venture partner, so CAP borrows, and we own 100% of CAP. So when CAP borrows to put into the joint venture, that debt is on our debt stock. If you have an incorporated company in which we, the government, own 45%, when that incorporated company borrows, it is not a part of the debt stock, which is for the government of Jamaica and for the people of Jamaica. So that's a huge advantage in that it allows the entity is no, you're going to need, an operation like this, you need working capital facilities. Like many profitable companies have debt. The point is that the debt that it takes on would not consolidate into the national debt stock, which is a huge advantage. And also, in a limited liability incorporated form, it allows us the option very easily to invite others to partake and to sell shares. As we all know, the government of Jamaica, going back to the 2010 IMF agreement, tried to market this very esoteric structure and, didn't find takers that would offer something that we'd have considered representative of the underlying value. In an incorporated form, we have a much better chance of getting a price that is representative of the substantive cash flow value as a reformed entity. But I, your support for incorporation, I note. I just wanted to make those particular points. And I understand that. So, and just with respect to the question on divestment, no, it would have been, Minister of Mining and Energy, Minister Montague, who would have first mentioned in his budget presentation, I believe in 2017 or 2018, about the goal to incorporate and to divest, to take by IPO. The exact amounts that we would be proposing to do have not been worked out as yet, but it would be useful to bring in a strategic partner, if only for a demonstration for the long-term value proposition of the operation. Okay, so if we went to market, and we didn't go to market just as GOJ and Noble, but we went as GOJ, Noble, and some new strategic, we're likely to have a more successful IPO. But all of those are matters for further discussion. I know. Timeline for incorporation, we are far advanced, and I don't want to give a precise timeline. That's a hazardous thing to do. It's an extraordinarily complex operation because it has been incorporated for 30 years. I just say that we are very far advanced, and we hope to get it done, not in a matter of years, but in a matter of months, right? Maybe 12 months, 11 months, 3 months, 8 months. I don't want to commit. With respect to the questions that you had on the power purchase agreement, I think the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Mining would be better placed to answer those questions. No, both the Minister of Mining and Energy would be better placed to answer those questions, members. So I thank you very much for the support and everything.
Mr. Speaker, if I could just ask the Minister one question. In the incorporated structure, as a minority shareholder, will the government of Jamaica through CAP will there be matters that require, will there be a shareholders agreement that would require, for example, any debt that is being assumed by the incorporated entity to be agreed by the minority shareholder before it can proceed? Would they have how will the board composition be structured and so on? How will the government's interest be protected as a minority shareholder?
So, absolutely. As you pointed out, incorporation discussions have been ongoing and been very intense. There will be a shareholders agreement. There's a draft shareholders agreement. In fact, we have reached a commercial agreement on incorporation. I should have started by saying that. What is outstanding now are lots of legal maneuverings and making sure the AG's chambers is happy with the details and so on. But we have reached a commercial agreement which includes a very comprehensive shareholder agreement that provides minority protection to the government of Jamaica. There'll be many decisions that require unanimity, will be needed to be unanimous, right? And related party transactions, if there are transactions between Jamalco and Noble, those will have to be, to the best of my recollection, approved by the disinterested parties of the board. So it will function and operate as a well-structured corporate entity adhering to best practices of corporate governance with a shareholders agreement that dissolves on an IPO of a particular size, clearly, right? But while it remains a private entity, the shareholders agreement will govern the relationship between the partners with protections for the minority and a requirement for unanimity for major decisions. Right? If I may, Mr. Speaker, go into the other statement that I have. Mr. Speaker, oh, yes.
Which one are the copy you want? The new, what did you know the one before? Which one are you more interested in? Are you interested in this one now?
No, it's...
This one is the one that...
So, Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has and will continue to have a profound effect on the world economy, and Jamaica is not excluded from that. The pandemic has, caused some amount of dislocation, and the government of Jamaica has responded through various initiatives. On previous occasions, I've given an indication that we will focus our intervention on the vulnerable population in a very targeted way. Having started with a broad-based approach, we want to focus on the vulnerable population. As parents prepare to send children back to school, it is therefore incumbent upon us, and indeed what we're here to announce today, is a program to alleviate some of the pressures that members of the vulnerable population groups in Jamaica face with respect to back to school. So, Mr. Speaker, the COVID allocation of resources to employees program has been expanded to provide a back to school component to children within the PATH and poor relief programs. It should be noted that the government has, over the last 2 years, provided back-to-school grant to PATH students, and for this fiscal year, that grant was programmed at $3,500 per student. Because of the COVID pandemic, Mr. Speaker, the government for this fiscal year will provide an overall back-to-school grant of $8,500 per student at the primary and secondary level who are within the PATH or the poor relief programs to assist with procurement of school supplies as the new academic year commences. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in addition, the government will also provide a grant of $5,000 to every child at the early childhood level within the PATH and poor relief programs. Mr. Speaker, there was no provision for those before. Mr. Speaker, this means that the provision under the CARE program will serve to increase the program PATH amount for students at the primary and secondary levels to $8,500 per student, while providing $8,500 for each primary and secondary poor relief student. And the care component will also cover $5,000 per child at the early childhood level, from 0 to 6. As we know, 0 to 3, you don't have a book list from the government of Jamaica. 3 to 6, the book list is less than the book list from 6 to 10 and from 10 to 17. Disbursement of the back-to-school grant will be through the regular PATH and poor relief payment avenues during the month of August. This means that the grant to PATH students will be made by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security with the usual PATH by monthly cash grant, while the grant to the poor relief students will be made by the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development with the usual monthly payout. It should be noted that where students are on both PATH and on poor relief, the back-to-school grant will be made through the PATH program. Utilization of the PATH and poor relief payment channels for disbursement of the back-to-school grant is a fast means and also implies that the grant will be delivered to the responsible adult registered with each program with whom each student is associated. So, Mr. Speaker, there are over 200,000 Jamaican students who will be benefiting from this program. And the government will be providing a total of $1.6 billion for 203,000 students from early childhood, primary and secondary for our back-to-school program. The back-to-school component of the CARE program will be providing approximately $1 billion of the overall estimated grant. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the Constituency Development Fund, I am providing this update on behalf of the Most Honourable Prime Minister. The Constituency Development Fund places restrictions on the maximum amount that can be allocated to a program in a fiscal year. As per the CDF's Project Management Unit Operations Manual, dated March 2019, Section 4, subsection 4.8, states that with the exception of educational development projects, which shall not exceed 10 million, ... Given the pressing needs of back to school that has been created by the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Speaker, for the current financial year 2020-21, the upper limit for educational development projects will be moved from $10 million per constituency to $12 million, Mr. Speaker. And members will be able, if they so elect, Mr. Speaker, to via unused sums from other programs will be able to via unused sums from other programs to the educational component of the program. Mr. Speaker, by having a national program that targets 200,000 of our most vulnerable students with a $1.6 billion back-to-school education grant, and complementing that with efforts by members of parliament at the constituency level, who will now have an extra $2 million to be able to set aside from their CDF, times 63, $120 million to target people in their constituency. This, Mr. Speaker, the government of Jamaica...
Order, please.
The government...
No, on a point of order, Mr. Speaker. Order, please. On a point of order. No, the... Order, please. I wish to hear Mr. Phillips. Yes. In the minister's presentation just now, he's giving the impression that all members of parliament has $10 million for back to school, and that is not the case. All right? Each member of parliament has different amounts approved by the CDF committee, already approved. So I don't want it to be, I don't want the minister's presentation Mr. Phillips. To give the impression out there that each member of parliament has $12 million for expenditure for the CDF.
Mr. Speaker, I ask.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, I ask members of the member. Yes.
Mr. Phillips, Dr. Clarke, make a statement you wish to seek correction of. What Dr. Clarke is saying, you are seeking a correction of it or an explanation of it. Will you do that without going to the other minister? He's making a presentation. If what he's saying, you're saying is incorrect, please advise the Speaker and I can see. Order, please.
I can respond to him, Mr. Speaker. Allow me to respond to him. There's no need for him to repeat it. So, Mr. Speaker.
Members.
Mr. Speaker.
A member has a right to seek clarification.
Mr. Speaker, the member got a little excited. I did not say what you have imputed me to say. No. I wouldn't. I don't need to do that. What I have said is that the maximum amount possible under the CDF rules is 10 million, and we are increasing the cap to 12 million, which means no.
Order, please.
Which means
the member is on his feet making a presentation.
Which means that members of parliament can increase the amounts, or if they are in that position. Okay, and I'm also saying that members can. The technical word is via, right? By viament, move allocations from other areas to the educational projects. That's what I'm saying. Nothing more. Okay?
What, Minister? Under the rules of the CDF, a environment cannot take place outside of a CDF committee. So are you saying, what, excuse me? So are you saying that members can via monies outside will be permitted to?
So, So what we're saying, member, is that you can via, to the extent that you have that space available, you can via moving funds from other programs to the educational program. Okay?
But is there going to be a CDF committee that will be happening to be able to approve that? So if that is going to be so, can the minister state?
No. What I'm saying to you is that there will be a cabinet decision that will give effect to this, member. Okay, and that I am advised that will suffice until we are able to have that parliamentary meeting to which you refer. Okay, but so what it does is it allows what we have been having is that members have needed to expend more on education this year, and so we're saying to the extent that you need to, the limit will be removed, and later on, if there is a need to move the cap, we can do so. But moving the cap at this point in time, you can understand, right? It's just not, and I hope you can work with, on this. Moving the cap at this point in time, Leader of the Opposition, is not something that is the optics of it, right? So we're doing it in this way. Yes.
while I believe everybody, in principle, would welcome the ability to assign more resources to education projects. But now that means that you have to vie to take it at the expense of something else. But in principle, everybody would like that. The practical issue which arises is twofold. First of all, the absolute limit on the resources, and many members of parliament have already spent or already assigned, so there's not more money. And secondly, the fact is that if the schedule of parliament is as being rumored, and parliament is likely to dissolve, then there is no prospect of the approval process, which is now stipulated in the guidelines, being followed, because you can't via or reassign or get more funds not assigned spent unless there is an approval by the committee, the CDF Committee of Parliament. So the question is whether you understand, and if you do, can you advise us, that either the guidelines are going to be changed and everybody will be able to assign these funds and cabinet approval will be given for that immediately, or whether there is going to be an emergency meeting scheduled that will allow this committee to meet and those changes to be made before the parliament is dissolved.
So member,
Please.
Thank you for that, and I agree with you that everyone would want to have the opportunity to allocate more funds, okay? And what we're saying is that if you're going to be allocating funds from other areas, there's a possibility in the remainder of the fiscal year to top up the total amount of the CDF. I am mindful, as a representative, as all 63 of us are, that the public is looking on, and I don't think at this point in time that it would be the right thing to increase the amount in light of, right? So what the way we're doing it is to allow a shift of focus to the extent that that is desirable by the particular member, and we'll be saying to the member that over the course of the fiscal year, we're not going to allow it to be disadvantageous, okay? But if the focus needs to be education now, focus on it now by us increasing the limit. And we can, right? Now, with respect to your second point, the method will the best of my sort of knowledge, the method is unlikely to be by means of the parliamentary committee meeting tomorrow or the day after. My understanding is that if indeed things are to progress the way in which it is probably expected, things will be concluded in sufficient time that the next meeting will occur before the beginning of and will allow for the procedural steps to for the procedural steps to be taken. So on this, what I'm asking for is for, right, just, right. But allow me to repeat the punchline for me now. $1.6 billion for back to school for 200,000 vulnerable students. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your cooperation on that.
Mr. Golden.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I must say how disappointed I am in the announcement that the minister has made. It really is a total anticlimax. All MPs were hoping and expecting an announcement that would have involved additional funds being provided by way of relief in this most difficult back-to-school period for their constituents. Talk about reallocating money within the existing CDF envelope is utterly meaningless. All of us have our projects already approved. Many of us have expended funds on housing issues, on economic enablement issues, on COVID-related expenses. There is no money to reallocate to expanding the back-to-school envelope that we have already had approved as part of our CDF process. More funds should have been provided for this, and not talk about reallocating from the existing envelope. We're in a back-to-school crisis in an economy which is contracting, and while we welcome the $5,000 of additional amount per student for PATH, and for the poor relief, the children on poor relief, there are many, many families who are not on PATH and who need their help and are not going to get it. There's nothing in this for them. It is an absolute dereliction of duty. And I ask the Minister and the Prime Minister, who is absent from the House, to wheel and come again and provide some money for the people who have to go back to school and their parents. We need that. Mr. Speaker, it's not sufficient to just give a little extra to PATH and poor relief. The needs are much broader and wider and deeper than that. And every member of Parliament is feeling the pressure now from their constituents who need help. And there's no answer from the government. We're absolutely disappointed. Shame. Shame on this government, Mr. Speaker. Shame.
Nigel.
Minister, in terms of the early childhood level, will this 5,000 per child be restricted only to the PATH and poor relief programs, or basic school children more generally will get it? And if that is the case, if it's restricted, what percentage of that basic school cohort do you anticipate will benefit?
Minister, I have a suggestion. There are thousands of kids who have been taken off the PATH program for some reason or another. We all hear that every day in our constituency. I am appealing to you, all those kids that have been taken off since March, let's put all of them back on the PATH program and give them the grant too. Put them back on now.
Remember, that's a constructive suggestion. I mean, you'll recall that when we, that whenever PATH expands in its benefits, the numbers increase. Now, clearly, we have to make sure that that increase is warranted and so forth. But that's a constructive suggestion that I will take back to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, and it's something that we could potentially do. With respect to the question that a member from Central Manchester asked, I want you just to recognize that no government ever before has provided back to school nationally to persons in the 0 to 6 category. All right? And this we'll be doing here for the first time, certainly in time that we can look back and check the records. The amounts that will be provided will be we're targeting the vulnerable population. So it will be those at the early childhood level, 0 to 6 in age, whose parents or the adults in charge of whom who are enrolled in PATH. Now, of the 200,000 kids, as you know, that are covered by both PATH and poor relief, represent at least a third of the entire school population. So we are reaching a very large component of the vulnerable population group. With respect to the earlier contribution, what I will say, Mr. Speaker, is that the government of Jamaica is mindful of the time that we are in and the time that we're about to enter in. And the government will not, at this time, be increasing allocations to members of parliament while an election campaign is likely to be underway. We are not going to do that. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. The minister, no doubt, is aware that the student population as a whole has been without access to school from March, thereabouts. And therefore there is a risk that many have lost the benefits of continuous learning. And we all know that the failings that can result can result in a long-term deficiency and deficit for various students. Permanent setback. It is also the case, and I believe you will agree, that a lot of the teaching that is going to have to take place as we reopen schools, and in fact it was reported in this parliament, is going to be online, remote teaching. And we still haven't heard any reports as to how the COVID-19 issues are going to be handled in the school. But let's put that to one side. If we are going to do 30% of the teaching online, then it's going to affect many students not on path, but who will have to undertake measures such as buying computers, buying data services and the like, in order to make up for this deficiency that has been in existence since March. It is that consideration which leads me to ask whether you would be willing to consider the suggestion made by the opposition spokesman on education, that the grants be raised, first of all, to $10,000, and that it include all the students, because everybody is going to have to make additional expenditures. And the issue of the MPs is really a red herring. In fact, the truth is you brought it up, not us. Huh? And you brought it up, and we still don't see now where the practical implications of now, not later on in the fiscal year, the demands that parents are going to have to satisfy our demands of September and now to ensure that their children can get back on the ladder of learning immediately and not suffer anymore. But it's not up. While we welcome the benefits to PATH, many parents who are not qualified for PATH but who are on the edge of the poverty line are going to need the support from the government. And what purpose does a government serve if it's not going to take care of its people and of its children most of all?
So,
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. All right.
1 minute, Doctor.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr.
thank you. Mr. Speaker, the increased allocations announced by the minister are helpful. In 2015-2016, I would wonder if he is aware that there was an estimate, a credible estimate done within the Ministry of Education to indicate that there were as many students who ought to be on PATH, who needed PATH, than those who actually were on PATH. Is there a method whereby that continuing and probably increasing predicament can be dealt with. That's one. Secondly, will the Minister appraise the members of this House? One important benefit that has been accorded in recent times by the government at back-to-school time has been the provision of book vouchers. A primary school book list at grade 3 or grade 4 is probably $15,000. I stand corrected, it may be more than that. For a high school student, it is more than double that. And the capacity of members of parliament, beyond their CDF allocations, to receive assistance from the Ministry of Education for school vouchers has been a tremendous fillip to education. Will those vouchers be available this year?
So, Mr. Speaker, first responding to the comments. So the way in which we are approaching, as you know, Jamaica, like much of the world, is experiencing challenges as a result of COVID-19 and the dislocation it has caused. You have laid out some of those with respect to the challenges that some persons have had in receiving their education online. Our approach to education assistance at this time consists of multiple avenues, two of which I've mentioned here today. And the two today are a back-to-school support targeted at the vulnerable population, and we have to be targeted members because resources are finite. We have to have programs where we know that the beneficiaries are persons who are in need, and that is an absolute priority. Now, that doesn't mean that our intervention starts there and ends there. The Minister of Education has been a very, and I'm sure, the Minister of Education has been a very frequent visitor. And there are programs that the Ministry of Education is working on, along with the Ministry of Technology, to bridge the information technology gap, so that to the extent that we're going to need to rely on online modalities come September or October, that funds can be available for that. So our support of education in light of COVID-19 will go beyond. Today I'm just speaking about this back-to-school initiative. But come September, we're going to have to make certain allocations that are not yet in the budget in order to support the Ministry of Education in ensuring that children, vulnerable children and otherwise, have access to learning. And as you'd have heard the Minister of Education speak to on previous occasions, the move to putting textbooks in electronic format on a tablet goes a long way to achieving that initiative. And we're going to see how we can support to ensure a wide distribution of those particular devices. But there are other things that we have to make provisions for. We're going to have to make provisions to make sure schools are properly sanitized and that they have dispensers with hand sanitizing equipment. And so there are things in train and that have gone through the policy making process and that will be implemented come the start of the new school year. That is not a part of the topic for today's presentation coming from me. Yeah?
Mr. Speaker, no, 1 second. Dr. Phillips.
Minister, as I said, you would accept two. Well, my first question, I seem to recall in an earlier presentation that you made to the House that there was some $3 billion remaining after what you assigned to care programs, etc., that was available. You have today spoken to 1.6. Now, if the 3 was there, it may have been used up in some other way, but I'm assuming that it remains and could be assigned. But that's the first question, which would suggest, if it is available, that more could be done. The second question is whether you would agree that the path list that we have now, which predates COVID, would mean, given that COVID has taken place, that there are many families with children whose children are not now on path, but whose economic circumstance would have been so negatively affected by the COVID pandemic and its effects on the economy that they are now in need. So I ask again, would you consider a re-examination of the proposal made by the opposition spokesman on education to provide all students with a $10,000 grant that would enable us to take account of those who will slip through the cracks? Thousands, tens of thousands, who will slip through the cracks and who are going to suffer this deficiency that could be a permanent setback for them. Would you consider it?
So, Mr. Speaker, first with respect to the question asked from the member of Central Kingston, the Ministry of Education will have funds available from the Ministry of Finance if it is something that they choose to do, to continue the program that they would have had been doing the year before, right? No.
Order, please. Mr. Speaker, this matter has been under discussion for some time. The question of additional provisions for those who are not on path, not on poor relief, but obviously need assistance. And we all are aware of that in our respective constituencies. And the appeal was made to the Ministry of Finance, and they said they would consider it. That's supported by the member, former minister, and so on and so forth. We just had a discussion. And the Minister of Finance has said that he will enable us to have another $50 million to assist those people who now are not on either of the provisions here to get additional assistance. That we can have in place to give them by the end of September. By the end of September. So it will go a great distance in assisting and allaying some of the challenges that they now will have to face.
Okay, so just in response to your question, member, the impact of the pandemic is multifaceted, and that would be underscored in the approach that we have taken, which is tried to target a lot of different groups and a lot of different sectors. And we have had balances remaining, and we have to be very strategic about how those are used because of the time that it's likely to take. I haven't announced here some of the other things that we are doing and have been doing, simply because we're doing this because we care about people and not simply to get mileage from it. But I will mention some of those since you've sort of asked me to. Okay, we are. That we would have sort of extended the payments for those who lost their jobs to July and August. We have to make provisions in the event that we may have to extend longer. But what we have done for a number of those persons, we we required something to be uploaded from the employer. For many persons, months have gone by and the employer has not uploaded. But TAG has done analysis. They were on the payroll before March. They're not on the payroll in April. They're not there in May. They're not there in June. They're not there in July. They're not there in July. And therefore, it's reasonable to assume that they have lost their jobs. And so with a cabinet approval, we are going to make payment to those persons who were on the payroll, applied, and have not returned to the payroll since, even though their employer has not uploaded a P45. Okay? So we are broadening the scope and broadening the reach of the intervention to, we estimate that is going to be about 5,000 people that will be added to it. And there are other components that we are adding, and that is a response to your question. So we do the thing with social intervention, as we know, targeting. It's always difficult to get targeting up to 100%, right? And you. Hmm? Yes. No, yes, overall, but yeah. So you remember, we're going to do some of the initiatives through the Ministry of Education. So just to make sure that we don't have to make sure that we target people who need it. We're taking a two-pronged approach. One approach is to go for the vulnerable population, and I agree with you that these were for a lot of them, pre-COVID vulnerable. I agree with you on that. And then another approach from the Ministry of Education, okay, who have the schools, know the schools, etc., have allocation to them and for them to outreach. Remember, I'm only speaking about the program out of the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Education has come forward with many further proposals. We can't do all, not necessarily on the social support side only, but on technology and other things. And we are going to support to the extent that we can, and that we believe that with that two-pronged approach of going at this vulnerable population of 200,000, recognizing that it is not complete, recognizing that up front, and going at the level from the Ministry of Education through the school system, we believe that we will reach several more through a different modality, not necessarily through this particular back-to-school modality, but through other modalities. Because we are just cognizant that as time goes by, we have to, the approach that we would have started with, which was necessary at that time, and I mentioned it before, that as time goes by, we're going to be more and more targeted, and we're going to make sure that 100% of those who receive are in need. Getting 70%, that's not good enough. It has to be 100% of those who are in need. But I take your point that it doesn't necessarily mean that all exactly. And so we're going to complement it with an approach from the Ministry of Education to support them directly, for them to make alterations to accommodate other students who may be in need but who are not on the PATH program. And a part of that, I hope you'll see the connection, is with the announcement the minister made earlier to say that auxiliary fees are going to be capped. I believe you said at $5,000. So if you think about that, member, and just to be logically consistent, to the extent that auxiliary fees last year were $10,000 or $15,000, by removing it and making sure that it's $5,000 and supporting to the extent that we can, that is an indirect transfer. Okay? So that's the point I'm making of the multiple approaches that we're using.
Hold on. Mr. Speaker, almost every school that will reopen in September is going to have a blend of in-school and at-home learning. It means that all our students are going to have to spend a couple days per week accessing their education from home. Mr. Speaker, I raised this issue from last year about the government's approach to the tablet in school project. They terminated a contract with a provider. The provider had 19,000 tablets in the country. I suggested mediation as a means of getting the tablets to the kids. We are in August. School is to start back in September. It's 4.5 years of this administration, and not one tablet has reached one child in Jamaica. Now, understand me. That is bad and not so bad without COVID. But it's poor people pitney feel it most in COVID. I can buy my son a tablet or a computer. I have internet access at home. But what about the poor? They can't access it. The poor helper cannot buy a tablet, don't have data at home. We have the tablets here, and we have sat on them. I'm told the tablets are in Jamaica. If they're in Jamaica, why you don't call back the students and give them now? What are you waiting on? You're going to go through an entire term and not give one tablet for Jamaican students?
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
What is the point of order?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order. Point of order. Mr. Speaker, the member is misleading the House. We've announced many times that there are 40,000 tablets to be distributed to students. They will begin at the end of August.
What is the point of order?
The tablets,
she has misled the House.
The majority.
She has misled the House. Not one new tablet has been given to one student.
The tablets are here. The majority of the tablets are here. 40,000 tablets. 40,000 tablets. Starting at the end of August, 40,000 tablets.
Mr. Speaker, I will repeat, not one tablet has reached one child as we speak. Not one. We hear, when the minister came here last year, I cautioned her, I say your timetable don't make sense because we did it before. I said, don't stick to one provider, use two, so you manage the risk. You are at a point where you have tablets in the country. Call the kids in, invite them to the schools and give the kids the tablets. What you waiting for? Let me tell you something. At least minimum 50% of our students, have had no access to education since COVID. At least, minimum. And you sitting on tablets and waiting to give the kids the tablets? And you're going to give them a disservice to the Jamaican people. Disservice to the Jamaican.
Mr. Speaker, a question in reflecting on what you said about increasing the amount you want to spend on education. For example, I allocate about, say, 8 million, 6 million for education. If I want to add another 2 million, for example, what's the procedure? Do I just write to CDF office and say, I am cancelling this project and I would like to put 2 million more towards education? I want you to be very clear with us.
Sure. So, Mr. Member, yes, that is correct. And it's
Order, please. Order, please.
That is correct.
The Minister of Finance says.
That is correct.
Yes.
And it's calculated on the fact, or predicated rather, on the fact that 5 months of the financial year have gone. The $20 million CDF is for 12 months. The calculation is that members have not spent all 20 billion in 5 months, right? And therefore, if you can reallocate from some other area to education. And as I said before, if I am where I expect to be in the not too distant future, and the need exists to increase the overall, I give you assurance that is something that I I will favorably consider. Okay? Yes, yes.
Can I give you some voucher?
Are we getting some vouchers?
No, hold on.
Order,
On the question of the tablets. No. Mr. Speaker. In fairness, I have to explain more in greater detail the response with respect to the tablets that you refer to. You know I have been here and I have explained that the information given to me since going to the Ministry of Education was that there was a contractual disagreement with the suppliers of the tablets. They were found not to be appropriate and other issues, legal issues. So they have not been able to be accessed. In the interim, we have made contractual arrangements and they have begun to be delivered and will be delivered in September when the schools are open for 200,000 new tablets, not the ones of which you speak. You have come here over and over and spoken of that set. That is, hold on, that is beyond the minister or my control. It is a legal matter. The tablets were found to be inconsistent with the requirements of the ministry that would use the tablets, that is the Ministry of Education. In education, we don't buy tablets. We distribute tablets that we get through the Ministry of Energy. They have undergone a thorough examination and found that the arrangements were inappropriate, the tablets were inefficient, and everything about that. So that is where that stands. And at the moment, they are in the process of satisfying the needs of, in fact, over 200,000 new tablets to facilitate those areas that we have mapped out and determined are deficient in the provision of internet and satellite services. So therefore, that is our program, and it is totally under control. And the blended approach to reopening school is on track, and the children will be served educationally when we open. That is the bottom line.
You're pretty much, you have confirmed what I said, which is that not one tablet has been distributed. All right? Yeah, pretty much. No, hear me. No.
Sorry, with respect. With respect. A tablet cannot be distributed where it is not needed. Right now, our children are not in school. They're not in school. What? They will be distributed when the children arrive in school. That is when they will be distributed.
order. No.
Minister.
Mr. Robinson.
Minister, I cannot believe a Minister of Education would say that you cannot distribute that tablet.
Mr. Robinson.
Yes.
The Speaker is trying to get your attention.
Okay.
Members, a statement by a minister cannot have the whole Parliament debating it. You have spoken 3 and 4 times on the matter already. And unless there is a question, a further question, I will not be in a position to allow this debate to continue. Mr. Semuda, it's for you to guide the House into that.
Mr. Speaker, having completed this matter, we can now...
Mr. Speaker, respectfully, I made one intervention.
I have said, Mr. Robinson, if you have a further question.
And I would like to ask it.
You permit to ask your question, not to have a debate.
Can the government of Jamaica indicate if tablets other than those which were involved with geotech, which is a subject of a contractual dispute, whether other tablets are in the country, and if they are, why have they not been distributed? School don't need to open, and you would betray your ignorance if you say that students can only get tablets when school is open. The students have been without education for 6 months. You can call them back in, distribute the tablets, and have online education to take the approach that you're not going to give the students the tablets because they're not in school.
Mr. Roberts, don't ask a question and answer it for me, please.
You heard my question?
Do not ask a question and answer it.
No, I didn't answer the question.
And I will seek for him to answer you. If he does not,
no, I will talk. The people from Southeast St. Andrews send me, I will talk.
Let me answer you. Mr. Speaker, and you can take this as the official position of the government of Jamaica. We will not be going forward with the contract for the tablets of which you speak until, I'm glad you passed it, I hope you will give up on that notion. All right. The tablets that are here.
Let's have some order.
Just keep talking. Shut up, you're looking at me. Now, the other, which people? Which people? Which people? You have any more?